Trust in our institutions is at an all-time low, and this mistrust has driven people to seek alternatives in places previous generations never imagined. SigaiOnline.org. In the political realm, a wave of visionary experiments has emerged in cyberspace, reimagining what a country or community can be without traditional borders. These are the digital city-states and virtual political experiments born on the internet, borderless nations, and online governance platforms that exist beyond the nation-state. From blockchain jurisdictions offering do-it-yourself citizenship to micronations claiming tiny slivers of land, a new breed of pioneers is trying to build societies in cyberspace. Their stories are part cautionary tale, part utopian vision, a testament to human ambition, technology's promise, and the sobering reality of what it takes to govern in the digital age. One of the earliest and most emblematic examples was BitNation, founded in 2014 as a self-proclaimed blockchain jurisdiction that invited anyone in the world to become a citizen of a virtual, voluntary nation. BitNation offered many of the same services as a traditional government, issuing ID documents, notarizing marriages, mediating disputes, but did so on a public blockchain and without any territory, billing itself as the world's first borderless nation. The idea was radical. If a nation is essentially an agreement among people, why not let people choose their nation freely across borders through the internet? BitNation's founder, Suzanne Tarkowski-Tempelhoff, argued that sovereign services could be unbundled from geography and run peer-to-peer, empowering individuals who felt underserved by existing states. In practice, becoming a citizen of BitNation meant signing a digital constitution and recording one's identity and vital data via smart contracts on Ethereum. Thousands signed up, drawn by the promise of governance by consent and the chance to transcend the lottery of birth that usually determines one's citizenship. In concept, BitNation showed how a nation can be as much an ideological community as a legal entity. As one journalist noted, one strength of BitNation lies in its ability to give agency to groups who have been ignored or repressed by modern nation-states. Media coverage lauded BitNation's vision of peer-to-peer voluntary governance, freeing people from the accident of birthplace in determining their civic life. For example, an indigenous group in North America declared itself a BitNation-affiliated virtual nation to assert its sovereignty in cyberspace when it lacked recognition on land. And during Europe's 2015 refugee crisis, BitNation launched a Refugee Emergency Response initiative to provide refugees with blockchain-based ID cards and access to an arbitration system, aiming to offer some governance and aid services beyond any single state's capacity. These lofty ambitions earned BitNation praise, and even an award from a UNESCO-affiliated forum for digital innovation. Yet the project trajectory also offered cautionary lessons. Vision alone was not enough to build a stable digital polity. For all its idealism, BitNation struggled with the pragmatic challenges of running a nation without territory or traditional authority. Internal governance issues emerged almost immediately. In late 2015, several core team members very publicly resigned, criticizing BitNation's management as chaotic and unsustainable. One departing member accused the project of playing on the idealistic visions of many people when I know the structure and management of the organization would not allow it to succeed. Tempelhoff, for her part, doubled down on her libertarian, anti-establishment ethos, retorting that if former colleagues leave because of the lack of incorporation, clearly they understood nothing. I stand with the strong belief that everything governments do can be done on the blockchain. If others are not part of that belief, they should not be a part of BitNation. Her uncompromising stance did little to steady the ship. The public feud shook confidence in BitNation's leadership, just as it was trying to raise funds. A 2016 crowd sale, a sort of ICO for the nation, ended in disaster, raising less than 1% of its target capital, roughly $11,000 of a hoped-for $2 million. Enthusiasm and activity dwindled in the following years. As of August 2022, BitNation's original domain was sold off and the project was considered defunct. The collapse of one of the first digital nations underscored how hard it is to sustain governance purely online, especially when human factors like leadership, trust, and funding prove as critical as the underlying technology. While BitNation was purely virtual, another project took a hybrid approach, mixing bold, real-world action with digital nation-building. In April 2015, Czech political activist Vít Jedlička traveled to an uninhabited patch of land on the Danube River between Croatia and Serbia and proclaimed it the Free Republic of Liberland. Liberland's claimed territory was only 7 square kilometers of riverside woodland, roughly the size of Gibraltar, but Jedlička saw big potential in this no-man's land. Inspired by libertarian thinkers like Ludwig von Mises and Ayn Rand, he envisioned a minimalist state with laissez-faire capitalism and an economy based on cryptocurrency. In effect, it was a startup country bootstrapped via the internet. combining a physical territorial claim, however tenuous, with the global reach of a digital community. Anyone around the world could apply for Liberland citizenship online, and many did so enthusiastically. Early on, tens of thousands registered. Over the following years, interest would swell into the hundreds of thousands. As of 2024, Liberland had received roughly 735,000 citizenship requests via its website, though only about 1,200 people ultimately obtained Liberland passports, often by donating or investing up to $10,000 to the fledgling nation. The gap between the requests and actual citizens hints at one reality of such experiments. Clicking a sign-up form is easy. Committing time or money is harder. For a would-be country that isn't recognized by any other state, Liberland has managed to construct some trappings of statehood through digital means. It drafted a constitution and set up a rudimentary governance system with institutions like a Congress and judiciary conducted largely online. It created its own cryptocurrency token, Liberland Merit, intended to reward contributions and eventually serve as a national currency. It offers an e-residency program and issues fancy-looking diplomas and ID cards to its citizens. Much of the governing framework exists on GitHub repositories and blockchain smart contracts rather than in brick-and-mortar offices. The Liberland government in exile operates out of offices in Prague and Belgrade, since its claimed territory remains mostly inaccessible swamp and forest that Croatian authorities guard closely. Indeed, the physical side of Liberland has been an uphill battle from the start. Croatia, which disputes Liberland's claim, has frequently blocked access to the land and arrested many would-be settlers, including Jedlicka himself, for trespassing. No nation-state has extended diplomatic recognition to Liberland, leaving it in a legal gray zone. And yet the Liberland community persists virtually. They hold elections for a self-styled government, confer titles like ambassador on prominent supporters to represent Liberland abroad, and host meetups and conferences to rally the faithful. In 2023, a determined group of Liberland volunteers managed to briefly camp on the claimed land, arriving by boat and putting up a makeshift structure that they proudly dubbed Liberland's first house, before Croatian police removed them. All these efforts, however symbolic, have kept alive the idea that a country could be crowd-funded into existence, even if political reality has so far refused to bend. Economically, Liberland's experiment has been equally revealing. Lacking traditional means of income like taxes or trade tariffs, the micronation has sustained itself through voluntary donations, paid e-residency and citizenship programs, and its involvement in the cryptocurrency industry. By 2023, Liberland reported an annual income of about $1.5 million, largely from supporter donations and crypto-related activities. Tellingly, more than 99% of Liberland's financial reserves were held in Bitcoin, an all-in bet on crypto that outside observers have flagged as highly risky. One analyst noted Liberland could face the same challenges as El Salvador did when it adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, such as extreme volatility and reliance on an external asset. This embrace of cryptocurrency isn't just a financial strategy, but part of Liberland's libertarian identity. It seeks to demonstrate the viability of a state without fiat money or central banks. The flip side is that Liberland's fortunes are tied to the boom and bust cycles of crypto markets. When crypto prices soared, Liberland's treasury swelled. When they crashed, the nation felt the pinch. This underscores a practical lesson. Trying to run a proto-country on donations and crypto gains can work in boom times, but it offers little stability or security. Even so, nearly a decade on, Liberland continues to inch forward, its endurance a testament to how a committed digital community can keep a quixotic nation-building project alive against the odds. The Liberland story highlights both the possibilities, rallying global support around a vision of maximum freedom, and the limitations, the stubborn grip of existing borders and laws, that confront these digital city-state pioneers. As some built nations in cyberspace or on disputed ground, others looked even further afield, to outer space. Asgardia, launched in 2016 by Russian scientist and businessman Igor Asherbaily, styles itself as the first space nation, a country with no land on Earth at all, only a satellite in orbit. In late 2017, Asgardia managed to get a small satellite, Asgardia 1, deployed into Earth's orbit and declared that this device and the data on it constituted Asgardia's sovereign territory. The Asgardians adopted a national constitution, established a flag, anthem, and governmental structure, including an elected parliament and appointed ministers, all the while operating entirely online from offices in Vienna. The audacity of claiming nationhood based on a CubeSat in space was met with skepticism. Legal scholars pointed out that a payload in orbit cannot be considered sovereign territory under current space law, and no existing country recognizes Asgardia as a state. But the romantic vision nonetheless attracted enormous public interest. In the first 2 days after Asgardia's announcement, over 100,000 people worldwide registered for citizenship. Within 3 weeks, the number had swelled to 500,000 signups. That viral growth was a testament to how hungry people were for new frontiers and new forms of belonging. For perspective, 500,000 people is more than the population of some existing countries. The idea of so many citizens joining a nation that didn't exist a month prior was startling. Unlike BitNation or Liberland, Asgardia framed itself not as a rebellion against existing states, but as a futuristic complement to them, a space kingdom meant to unite humanity and extend civilization beyond Earth. Its charter emphasizes peace, scientific progress, and the motto, One Humanity, One Unity. After the initial burst of signups, Asgardia moved to solidify its community. It held an election to form an Asgardian parliament, which convenes virtually, and instituted a mandatory citizenship fee of €100 per year for those who wish to be official, voting citizens. This step significantly winnowed the numbers. Many casual signups dropped out, but as of March 2019, Asgardia still claimed over 290,000 citizens who had passed identity verification and, presumably, maintained their membership fees. This made Asgardia arguably the most populous of the digital nations, at least by its own count. Functionally, of course, Asgardians still use whatever passports and rights their earthly nationalities confer. An Asgardian passport is more of a novelty document. Asgardia has not achieved recognition by the United Nations or any country, so its decrees and laws carry no authority besides the voluntary adherence of its members. Nonetheless, Asgardia has created a persistent global community. It regularly holds digital parliamentary sessions, discussions on space policy, and even IRL gatherings of its members. The project shows that a highly organized, well-funded virtual nation can sustain engagement over years. It also demonstrates a kind of boundary-pushing thought experiment come to life. By declaring a nation in space, Asgardia forces conversations about the future of law and citizenship beyond Earth, and about the extent to which private citizens can start something that looks like a country. The key lesson from Asgardia is that there is a genuine appetite for novel forms of global citizenship and identity. Hundreds of thousands of people were ready to sign onto a nation with no territory, purely for the idea of it. Turning that idea into a recognized reality, however, remains a formidable challenge under current political rules. As BitNation faded and Asgardia and Liberland settled into sustaining their niche communities, the next wave of digital governance experiments took inspiration from these pioneers while trying to avoid their pitfalls. A key insight was that declaring a new country outright, with flags, presidents, and claimed land, often provoked immediate legal and practical roadblocks. What if, instead, one could grow a nation gradually online, assemble a real population and economy first, and only later seek formal recognition or territory? This more incremental strategy was articulated clearly by technology entrepreneur Balaji Srinivasan in 2022 with his concept of the network state. In his book The Network State, Srinivasan argues that the internet allows people to self-organize at scale around a shared purpose, crowdfund resources, and eventually negotiate for political sovereignty, essentially by proving their community's value and capacity before asking for nationhood. He laid out a roadmap: start with an online community, a startup society, then bootstrap an economy and communal services, then acquire land, homes, compounds, campuses spread around the world that members can physically congregate on, and finally leverage that collective success to lobby for recognition on the international stage. The motto might be, build the nation before you declare it. Instead of one contiguous territory, a network state could be a distributed archipelago of like-minded people connected by the internet and a common vision. This idea captured the imagination of many in Silicon Valley and beyond who were dissatisfied with the status quo of governance. Suddenly, founding a country seemed like the ultimate startup venture. Indeed, by late 2022 and 2023, one could observe a shift in tech culture. Influential figures were talking about cloud communities and network states, and investor money began flowing into projects that a few years prior would have sounded like science fiction. The focus of some tech founders had moved from building the next social app to perhaps building the next new society. Several real-world projects have sprung up explicitly following this network state playbook. One example is Afropolitan, which emerged in 2022 aiming to create a digital nation for the African diaspora. Afropolitan's founders, a group of young African entrepreneurs, were inspired by Srinivasan's call to build new countries and also by historical movements like Zionism and Pan-Africanism that mobilized scattered peoples towards a common political identity. Starting from an online community of African expatriates and creatives, Afropolitan began issuing NFT-based digital passports to its members who pay a fee to join. These passports don't confer legal citizenship anywhere, but they serve as membership tokens granting voting rights in the Afropolitan network and perhaps future benefits. The idea is that as the community grows, through events, investment projects, and mutual aid among members, it will start to function like a nation economically and socially. Down the line, Afropolitan hopes to acquire territory. The founders have floated the idea of chartering a semi-autonomous city or zone in an African country as a physical base, and eventually seek sovereignty. It's a long roadmap, and Afropolitan is still in early stages, essentially operating as an online club with a strong cultural vision. But already it illustrates lessons about community building. It has tapped into a sense of transnational identity, uniting Africans and their diaspora around shared aspirations, and it leverages blockchain tech in a pragmatic way to manage membership and governance, using NFTs and tokens for participation, without making everything hinge on a coin's price. The project's backers rang the closing bell of the New York Stock Exchange in a publicity moment, signaling that this network state idea is starting to enter mainstream awareness. Still, even the founders admit that turning a digital network into a nation is easier said than done. Afropolitan, like others in its cohort, will have to prove that it can maintain momentum and trust, deliver real services to members, and eventually interface with the traditional nation-state system in order to achieve its grand vision. Other groups are experimenting with network state principles in different ways. A notable case is CityDAO, a collective founded in 2021 with the slogan, "Building the City of the Future on the Ethereum blockchain." CityDAO took a distinctly tangible first step. Rather than declare independence or create a virtual world, it crowdfunded the purchase of 40 acres of land in Wyoming, becoming the first DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, to own real-world property by way of a legal entity. Over 5,000 people from around the globe pooled more than $8 million worth of cryptocurrency to buy this parcel, which they dubbed Parcel Zero, under Wyoming's DAO-friendly LLC law. Members received citizen NFTs that entitle them to governance rights over the land. The bold acquisition made headlines and proved that online communities could coordinate to invest in common goods. But once the land was bought, the question became, now what? How do thousands of token holders reach consensus on managing a piece of land or building a city? The ensuing process has been an education in decentralized governance. A recent academic case study of CityDAO found that decentralized communication, while inclusive, posed challenges for accessibility and efficiency. In the Discord chats and forums, it was difficult for so many voices to stay coordinated. Decision-making itself was hampered by low voter turnout on proposals. Many members simply didn't vote unless an issue directly interested them, which led to a kind of paralysis where few proposals could meet the required quorum, what the study called a vetocracy of too many vetoes or not enough consensus. Moreover, CityDAO's voting system, like many DAOs, is token-weighted. One token, one vote, or more precisely, one NFT per citizen, plus some governance tokens. This raised the familiar risk of a DAO plutocracy, where a small number of people holding more tokens or NFTs could sway decisions if others were apathetic. Indeed, power dynamics in CityDAO began to resemble those in traditional organizations. Active contributors and those with larger stakes had outsized influence, despite the egalitarian ideals. On the positive side, CityDAO demonstrated that strangers can successfully co-own and co-manage an asset when rules are transparently encoded and enforced by smart contracts. The blockchain record of land ownership and governance votes created a baseline of trust among participants. It also showed that working within the law, in this case, Wyoming's recognition of DAO LLCs, can give a digital experiment more durability. CityDAO didn't have to fear being shut down by regulators as an illegal entity because it cleverly fit itself into an existing legal wrapper. While CityDAO has not yet built a futuristic smart city on its Wyoming land, the parcel remains largely undeveloped to date. It has undoubtedly yielded rich insights. Its journey lays bare the fact that technology can make certain processes easier, collecting funds, tracking ownership, but doesn't automatically solve fundamental governance challenges like participation, equitable power distribution, and efficient deliberation. Those have to be addressed through community norms, innovative governance mechanisms. Experiments with quadratic voting, delegate systems, etc. are ongoing, and sometimes through a hybrid of on-chain and off-chain governance. In short, CityDAO's experience is a microcosm of how, even in a blockchain-based state, the human element remains pivotal. Zooming out, what broader lessons emerge from these diverse digital political experiments? First, technology can dramatically lower the barriers to entry for creating a community with governance ambitions. It has never been easier for a motivated group of people to publish a constitution online, raise capital via cryptocurrencies, and coordinate their activities globally through social media and voting tools. The ease of participation, Often just a few clicks to join a nation means a project can recruit a mass following overnight, as Asgardia's 500,000 signups demonstrated. But turning that initial burst of enthusiasm into a lasting, functional polity is the real challenge. Many digital micronations discover that while you can quickly gather a crowd online, keeping people engaged in collective governance over the long term requires a strong shared identity, a sense of tangible stake, or clear benefits. BitNation's loose coalition of crypto-libertarians largely fizzled once the novelty wore off and internal conflicts erupted. Liberland's impressive sign-up numbers translated into a much smaller core of active citizens willing to devote serious time or resources. This suggests that a digital nation needs more than a slick website and inspiring rhetoric. It needs to cultivate a genuine culture and provide value to its members' lives if it hopes to keep them around. Some newer projects are taking this to heart by focusing on specific missions. For instance, a network state organized around medical freedom or around building charter cities for innovation, so that members rally not just around abstract nationhood, but around concrete goals. Having a clear, shared purpose can deepen commitment in ways that a generic, "let's start a new country," ethos may not. Second, any governance system, offline or online, must grapple with age-old dilemmas of power, legitimacy, and fairness. The digital realm doesn't magically solve these. In fact, it often amplifies them in unexpected ways. We've seen the risk of plutocracy when voting power is tied to tokens. On paper, it's one token, one vote, but in practice, those with more tokens or time to engage can dominate, echoing the inequities of money and influence in traditional politics. We've seen how anonymity and pseudonymity, while protecting privacy and lowering barriers to entry, can also undermine accountability. CityDAO found that some level of verified identity was needed to build trust for serious decision-making. Hence, it encouraged members to eventually do meetups and show their faces, not remain just faceless avatars. Many projects have had to balance the ideals of leaderlessness and decentralization with the practical need for leadership and coordination. Interestingly, most of these digital states start with a visionary founder or small founding team, a Tempelhof, a Jedlicka, an Asher Bailey, a Balaji Srinivasan, who acts as the driving force. That can jumpstart the nation, but it also introduces a single point of failure. BitNation, for instance, was closely tied to Tempelhof's personal leadership and suffered when she and others fell out. The transition from a founder-led project to a self-governing community is tricky. Just as in traditional revolutions, where the charismatic revolutionary must eventually give way to institutions, a digital nation needs to establish governance structures that outlive its founders. This might involve constitutions, elected councils, dispute resolution systems, and other mechanisms that distribute power and establish legitimacy among the members themselves. Some experiments, like Asgardia, took this seriously by quickly moving to elections and a constitution. Others, like BitNation, remained more ad hoc and personality-driven and struggled as a result. Third, these projects teach us about the interplay with existing nation-states and laws. No digital nation can fully escape the influence of the offline legal framework. BitNation discovered that offering services like marriage or ID on a blockchain does not mean traditional authorities will recognize them. A marriage recorded in BitNation's ledger might be meaningful to the participants, but it won't be recognized by any country's legal system without formal agreements. Liberland discovered that even if a patch of land appears unclaimed, nearby governments will not tolerate a new state popping up. Croatia's swift crackdown and dismissal of Liberland as a circus, with negligible real-world impact, drove that home. Asgardia discovered that you can't simply declare sovereignty in space and bypass international law. The Outer Space Treaty and nations' dominance in space affairs meant Asgardia's pleas for recognition went unanswered. On the other hand, CityDAO and some network states are exploring collaborative approaches, working within legal systems to carve out space for experimentation. CityDAO's use of Wyoming's DAO LLC law is a case in point. Other efforts are looking at partnering with receptive governments to establish charter cities or special autonomous zones that could serve as proto-network states under the umbrella of an existing country's sovereignty. The overall lesson is that outright confrontation with a state through unilateral secession or claims tends to stall or fail, whereas engagement and innovation within the system, or in the gaps it hasn't addressed yet, might yield more concrete progress. It's telling that some governments have taken note and started integrating aspects of these ideas. For example, Estonia's e-residency. While not a new nation, it offers a form of global digital citizenship, and certain U.S. states creating legal status for DAOs. These traditional actors implicitly acknowledge the demand for more fluid, digital-era arrangements. The experiments of Liberland, BitNation, and others, even if not fully successful on their own terms, have put ideas like virtual citizenship and DAO governance on the radar of policymakers. In that sense, they are already influencing the evolution of governance beyond their own communities. In the end, the grand experiment of digital city-states is still in its early chapters. So far, none of these projects has achieved the full sovereignty or international recognition of a traditional nation. There is no member of the United Nations that was born entirely online. It may be that none ever will in the form we expect. Yet these endeavors have already succeeded in reframing our imagination of what a community or nation could be. They have demonstrated that it's possible to gather tens or hundreds of thousands of people behind a political project that exists primarily in the cloud, something that would have sounded like science fiction not long ago. They have tested novel mechanisms of governance, using blockchain ledgers for transparency and immutable record-keeping, using tokens and crypto-economics to incentivize participation, and using online platforms for deliberation and voting across vast distances. In doing so, they've surfaced perennial truths: that governance is hard work, that people will disagree and factions will form regardless of medium, that prosperity and social order require more than code. Many of the early experiments have stumbled or even failed, but in the process they've become a rich source of insight for those that follow. Perhaps the most important lesson they offer is that governance innovation requires both technological and social innovation, hand in hand. A fancy decentralized app or token system means little without a passionate, organized citizenry to animate it. Conversely, a motivated community with a strong shared purpose will find ways to govern itself, even with rudimentary tools. In some cases, early projects may have overemphasized technology, speaking endlessly of smart contracts and tokenomics, while underestimating the human element of nation building. Newer projects seem to realize that success might depend more on psychology and community building than on cryptography alone. It's about creating trust among members, forging a collective identity, and devising norms and rules that people accept as fair. In fact, one could view these digital nations as laboratories for new social contracts. They allow us to ask, in a controlled setting, how people behave when given more direct control over collective decisions, or how economy might function on pure digital currency, or how identity and loyalty form in a group that has no physical homeland. Each experiment, whether it thrives or fizzles, yields data and experience that others can learn from. As one observer noted, being a fan of the network state idea is less about expecting any single attempt to take over the world, and more about expanding our experimental footprint for how we organize ourselves, arguably one of the most important challenges for humanity. StrangeLoopCanon.com. In an era when many feel that traditional governance is failing to address global problems or local needs, such experimentation is invaluable. The digital city-states of today may never fully achieve their utopian aims, but they are incubators for ideas that could influence how governance evolves for everyone. Already, concepts pioneered at the fringes, digital identities, cryptocurrencies, decentralized decision-making, are being adopted or considered by established institutions. In a way, the mere fact that a virtual nation like Asgardia or Liberland persists year after year, with a community of people who genuinely call themselves citizens of these entities, is astonishing. It shows that nationhood, at its core, is a shared narrative, a collective agreement to believe in a certain organization of society. If enough people believe, even a fictional nation starts to feel very real. The pioneers of internet-native governance are testing how far that truth can stretch. They are rewriting the story of nationhood in the language of the 21st century, with servers and blockchains instead of soil and blood, and in doing so, they are leaving behind a trove of lessons in both inspiration and humility for the next generation of nation builders, whether on-chain or on terra firma.